The condensation on Rain's cocktail glass slicked her palm when she saw the scarred hand settle on the bar. 1 year. 1 year of rebuilding herself in the neon shadows of Seoul, of learning to sleep without checking the locks 3 times, of walking through Gangnam without looking over her shoulder. 1 year since Marcus last wrapped his fingers around her throat and told her she'd never escape him, that he'd find her anywhere. And now that hand, with its distinctive scar across the knuckles from the night he punched through her apartment door, was resting casually on the polished obsidian bar of Eclipse, the most exclusive underground lounge in Seoul. Rain felt the oxygen leave her lungs when Marcus's eyes found hers across the velvet-draped room. His smile spread slowly, the same smile that once convinced her his jealousy was devotion, that she now recognized as a hunter's grin. She watched him say something to the woman beside him, a flash of bleached hair and bored expression. And then he began moving toward her table. Each step reverberated through her chest like thunder before a storm. She knew that walk, knew the deliberate roll of his shoulders, the way he'd crack his neck before delivering his venom. He was coming to reclaim her, to remind her that oceans weren't wide enough, that she belonged to him no matter how far she ran, to shatter the single night in months she'd allowed herself to breathe freely. Hello, I'm Rain's story, and this is a fictional narration created for entertainment. Terror crashed over Rain like a frozen wave. She couldn't let him reach her. Couldn't hear that voice again, the one that whispered threats disguised as love, promises disguised as warnings. Her eyes swept the lounge desperately, searching for an exit, a distraction, salvation. That's when she saw him, a man seated alone at the corner booth, his profile sharp against the amber glow of the lounge. Impeccable black suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, shoulders that spoke of controlled power, and dark hair styled with precision. He was lifting a glass of whiskey with movements so deliberate they seemed choreographed. Completely unaware of her unraveling world. Rain didn't think. There was no luxury of thought. Marcus was only 4 tables away now. She stood so abruptly her chair scraped against the marble floor, grabbed her clutch, and crossed to the stranger's table on legs that trembled beneath her black dress. Steps she prayed appeared confident rather than desperate. The man looked up as she approached, and Rain felt the air itself shift. He had eyes like polished onyx, deep and fathomless, and a face carved from stone that suggested mercy wasn't in his vocabulary. The faint outline of a tattoo crept above his collar. But she had already committed to this insanity. Before courage could abandon her, before survival instinct could fail, Rain leaned down and pressed her lips against his. The world stopped breathing. The man went, completely still beneath her touch. And Rain realized with dawning horror what she'd just done. She had kissed a complete stranger. In Seoul's most dangerous playground, surrounded by men who looked like they buried problems in concrete. But then she whispered against his mouth, so quietly only he could hear, with a voice fractured by genuine terror. "Please pretend to be my lover. Please." She felt his body change, every muscle coiling tight in a way that should have terrified her. When she pulled back just enough to meet his gaze again, she saw something lethal gleaming in that darkness. Something that said men didn't approach Kim Namjoon uninvited. And women certainly didn't kiss him without paying a price. Rain was about to pull away, to stammer an apology and flee into Seoul's neon-soaked night, when he did something she never expected. Namjoon smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, it was the smile of a dragon who'd just found something unexpected in his hoard, something breakable, something he might decide to keep. He stood with fluid grace, and Rain realized he towered over her, easily 6 feet of coiled danger in a tailored suit. Before she could process the shift, his arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against his body with a possessiveness that felt like it had been forged over years rather than seconds. "Who is this?" Namjoon's voice was velvet over steel, pitched low enough to make Rain's pulse spike. He was looking past her, and she turned slowly to find Marcus standing 3 steps away. The expression on Marcus's face was something Rain had never witnessed before. Shock, yes, but beneath it, something rawer. Calculation. Maybe even fear. Marcus had always been skilled at reading prey, at identifying who he could control and who would bite back. And something in Namjoon clearly triggered every survival instinct Marcus possessed. "Oh, didn't realize you were with someone, Rain." Marcus's voice was strained, artificially casual. He looked at Namjoon, then back at Rain, and she saw the exact moment he decided this battle wasn't worth fighting. "Just wanted to say hello. It's been a while." "1 year," Rain responded, hating how her voice wavered. Namjoon's hand tightened on her waist, a gesture that might seem comforting to any observer, but that Rain felt as a brand, as ownership. "1 year since you were told you were no longer welcome in my woman's life," Namjoon added, and there was something in the way he spoke those words, in the quiet menace beneath the courtesy, that made Marcus take a physical step backward. Marcus forced a smile that never touched his eyes. "Right. Yeah. Good to see you, Rain." He retreated. Rain watched him disappear into the crowd of Seoul's elite and criminal underground, and only then did she realize she was trembling. Only then did she understand that the man whose body pressed against hers wasn't her salvation. He was something far more dangerous. Namjoon guided her back to his booth with a gentle, pressure that somehow felt absolute, inescapable. When they were seated, when his bodyguards had subtly repositioned to give them privacy, he finally spoke. "You're shaking." It wasn't a question. He lifted his whiskey glass and pressed it into her hand. "Drink." Rain obeyed, the liquid burning down her throat. "Now," Namjoon said, his dark eyes studying her with the intensity of a man who made his living reading weakness and strength. "Tell me why you just claimed me as yours in a room full of people who know exactly who I am." Rain opened her mouth, closed it. What could she possibly say? That she'd just kissed Seoul's most notorious syndicate leader because a ghost from her past had cornered her? That she'd gambled everything on the mercy of a man who looked like he'd forgotten what mercy meant? She started. "Don't lie to me," Namjoon interrupted, and though his voice remained soft, there was violence sleeping just beneath the surface. "I can always tell when someone is lying." So Rain told him the truth. About Marcus. About running. About the years she'd spent building a life from ashes, only to watch it crumble the moment her past walked through a door. When she finished, Namjoon was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and traced one finger along her jawline, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "You made a choice tonight," he said. "You chose me as your shield. Do you understand what that means?" Rain shook her head, unable to speak. Namjoon's smile returned, sharp and possessive and absolutely certain. "It means you're mine now," he said, "and I protect what's mine." The Mercedes glided through Seoul's midnight streets like a shadow with purpose. Rain sat rigid in the back seat, hyper-aware of Namjoon's presence beside her, close enough that his cologne, something dark and expensive, invaded every breath. Close enough that she felt the heat radiating from his body despite the leather seat between them. She'd traded one cage for another. The thought circled her mind like a vulture. "You're thinking too loudly," Namjoon said without looking at her. His fingers drummed once against his thigh, the only tell that he was human and not the marble statue he resembled. "Ask your questions." Rain turned to study his profile, all sharp angles and controlled power in the passing streetlights. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Marcus can't reach you." He finally met her gaze, and Rain saw something flicker in those obsidian eyes. Something that might have been amusement if it weren't so cold. "My home." The car turned off the main road, climbing into the hills where Seoul's lights became a glittering sprawl below. They passed through gates that whispered money and power, the kind that didn't announce itself but simply was. The driveway alone felt longer than Rain's entire neighborhood. When the estate came into view, Rain's breath caught. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as art. All clean lines and dark stone, floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the moon like obsidian mirrors. Traditional Korean architecture reimagined through a lens of modern menace. Gardens that probably looked serene in daylight now appeared as labyrinthine shadows where anything could hide. "Welcome to the Dragon's Den," Namjoon said, and this time his smile held genuine warmth. Dangerous warmth. Inside, the estate was even more breathtaking and terrifying. Minimalist luxury that spoke of a man who needed nothing to prove his dominance. Art that Rain recognized from gallery catalogs she couldn't afford to buy. And everywhere, the subtle presence of security, men in dark suits who materialized and vanished like smoke, cameras hidden in the architecture's bones. Namjoon guided her through rooms that felt more like a museum than a home until they reached what he called the sitting room. Rain thought it looked more like a throne room, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's sprawl. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a sofa that probably cost more than her year of rent. Rain remained standing. Some instinct told her that sitting meant surrendering, and she'd surrendered enough for one night. Namjoon's eyebrow lifted slightly. Surprise or respect? She couldn't tell. He poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter, then crossed to stand before her. Close. Too close. He pressed the glass into her hand with fingers that were surprisingly gentle. "You saved yourself tonight by choosing the most dangerous man in that room," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers captive. "Do you understand what you've walked into, Rain Lakewood?" She'd given him her full name at the lounge. Now hearing it from his lips felt like a binding contract she couldn't read. "I traded a common predator for a legendary king," Rain whispered, finally understanding the full weight of her gamble. Namjoon's smile turned devastating. "Good. You're smarter than you look." He touched her chin, tilting her face up. "Now let me show you what it means to belong to a dragon." Rain barely slept that night in a guest room larger than her entire Seoul apartment. Every shadow seemed to hold one of Namjoon's men. Every silence felt like a held breath before something violent. When dawn finally bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she found herself summoned to breakfast on a terrace overlooking gardens that looked like they'd been designed by someone who understood beauty and brutality in equal measure. Namjoon sat reading a tablet, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked up as she approached, and Rain hated how her pulse jumped at that dark gaze. "Sit," he said, and this time Rain obeyed. Survival meant picking your battles. A woman materialized with coffee and disappeared before Rain could thank her. Namjoon set down his tablet with deliberate precision, the same way he seemed to do everything. Calculated, controlled, devastating. "We need to establish terms," he began, his voice carrying that velvet over steel quality that made her skin prickle. "You kissed me in public, in front of people who know my reputation. Word has already spread through certain circles that Kim Namjoon has claimed a woman. Do you understand what that means?" Rain wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, seeking its warmth. "That I've made you look weak?" Something flashed in his eyes, amusement, maybe respect. "That you've made yourself valuable. I don't claim things lightly. People will assume you matter to me, which means you're now both protected and targeted." He leaned back, studying her like she was a painting he was considering acquiring. "Your ex-lover Marcus is a problem. A small one, but problems left unattended grow teeth." "What kind of business are you in?" Rain asked, though part of her didn't want the answer. "The kind that makes problems disappear," Namjoon said simply. "Import, export, logistics. Legitimate ventures with shadow edges." I move things people need moved, protect interests that need protecting, and occasionally remove obstacles that threaten my empire. He paused, letting the implications settle between them. I'm telling you this because if you stay under my protection, you'll see things, hear things, you'll be introduced as mine. As your girlfriend, Rain said, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. As my woman, he corrected, and the possessiveness in those two words made her shiver. We'll maintain the fiction publicly. You'll live here, attend events at my side, learn to navigate my world. In exchange, Marcus becomes my problem to solve. Permanently. Rain's throat tightened. And privately? What do you want from me? Namjoon stood and crossed to her chair, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. His cologne wrapped around her like a claim. Privately, you'll follow my rules. You don't leave this estate without my security. You don't contact anyone from your old life. You don't lie to me. Ever. And you don't kiss anyone else, Rain. Not even for show. His hand cupped her jaw, thumb brushing her lower lip with devastating gentleness. This arrangement is fake, he continued, his voice dropping to something dangerous and intimate. But the protection is real. The danger is real. And if you break my rules, the consequences will be very real. He straightened, leaving her breathless. Do we have an understanding? Rain looked up at this beautiful, terrifying man who held her life in his perfectly manicured hands. Yes, she whispered, sealing a contract written in shadows and desire she didn't dare name. Rain had been living in the Dragon's Den for 3 days when the package arrived. She was in the estate's art studio, a room Namjoon had offered her without explanation, as if he'd known she needed space to paint away her demons, when one of his men appeared in the doorway. His face was carefully blank, but something in his posture screamed wrong. Miss Lakewood, he said, using the formal address Namjoon had insisted upon. You have a delivery. The box sat on the entrance hall table like a coiled snake. Plain brown cardboard, no return address, but Rain's name written in handwriting that made her stomach drop through the floor. Marcus's handwriting, the same scrawl that used to leave her love notes that slowly transformed into lists of her failures. Her hands shook as she reached for it. Don't touch that. Namjoon's voice cut through the air like a blade. He materialized from his office with 3 men flanking him, his usual controlled grace replaced by something predatory and lethal. Step away from it, Rain, now. She obeyed, watching as one of his men carefully opened the box with gloved hands. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a framed photograph. Rain and Marcus, from 2 years ago, before everything turned poisonous, before his love became a leash. Marcus had drawn a red X over his own face and circled Rain with the words, "Mine, always," scrawled across the bottom. Beneath the photo lay a hotel key card and a note in Marcus's handwriting. Room 1608. Shilla Hotel. Come alone or I'll make sure your new boyfriend learns what you really are. A pathetic girl who always comes crawling back. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a bomb detonates. Rain looked up to find Namjoon staring at the contents with an expression she'd never seen before. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. His hands, usually so controlled, had curled into fists. When his eyes met hers, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not anger at her, but rage on her behalf. Protective fury that felt like standing too close to a forest fire. How did this get past security? His voice was deadly quiet, each word precisely enunciated. The kind of quiet that preceded violence. We're investigating, sir, one of his men said, and Rain heard the fear beneath his professional tone. The delivery service has no record of... I don't want excuses. Namjoon's voice dropped even lower, somehow more terrifying for its softness. I want to know how someone breached my territory and delivered a threat to what's mine. He turned to Rain, and his expression shifted, still dangerous, but now layered with something almost tender. Did he ever hurt you physically? Rain's silence was answer enough. Namjoon's mask finally shattered. He grabbed the table's edge with enough force that Rain heard the wood creak, his knuckles white with restraint. When he spoke again, his voice carried a promise that made her shiver. He touched you in my house, threatened you under my protection. He straightened his suit jacket with sharp, violent movements. That was his last mistake. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single number. Prepare the car, and bring Jungkook. We're going hunting. Rain realized then that she hadn't traded one predator for another. She'd awakened a dragon who'd just declared war. Namjoon returned near midnight, smelling of expensive cologne and something darker Rain chose not to name. She was still in the art studio, unable to sleep, painting abstract shapes in angry reds and blacks that felt like her emotions made visible. She didn't hear him enter, only felt his presence like a shift in atmospheric pressure. He won't bother you again, Namjoon said quietly from the doorway. Rain's brush stilled on the canvas. She didn't ask what he'd done, didn't want confirmation of what she already suspected. Instead, she asked, "Did you kill him?" "No." He moved closer, studying her work with an intensity that made her self-conscious. But he's on a plane to Atlanta with a very clear understanding that returning to Korea would be the last mistake he ever makes. And enough broken bones to remember why. Rain should have felt relieved. Should have felt guilty. Instead, she felt nothing but a strange, hollow exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. Namjoon circled her easel, his dark eyes tracking each brushstroke. "You're talented. Formally trained?" "Art school dropout?" Rain admitted, adding shadow to her canvas with trembling hands. "My parents wanted a lawyer. I wanted to paint feelings that didn't have words. We compromised by me doing neither successfully." "Why did you really come to Seoul?" His question was gentle but demanding, the way everything about him seemed to demand truth. Rain set down her brush, suddenly too tired to maintain walls. "Because I thought I could disappear here, become someone new in a place where nobody knew the girl who let a man destroy her piece by piece." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out you can't outrun yourself." Namjoon was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He loosened his tie, shrugged off his jacket, and sat on the paint-splattered floor beside her easel like a king deciding to visit the mortal realm. "My father wanted me to be a professor," he said, staring at nothing. "Philosophy, literature, something respectable that matched my test scores. Instead, I inherited an empire built on shadows because my older brother was killed, and someone had to hold the kingdom together." He turned those fathomless eyes on her. "Every day I wear suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary and make decisions about lives and deaths. Every day I'm exactly what my father feared I'd become. We're both living lives we never chose, Rain." Something cracked open in her chest at the vulnerability in his voice. This terrifying, untouchable man suddenly looked human. Lonely. Like he'd been playing a role so long he'd forgotten where the mask ended. "Why did you really help me?" Rain asked. "That night at Eclipse, you could have had me removed." Namjoon reached out and touched her canvas, his finger tracing a red streak that looked like blood or passion or both. "Because when you kissed me, I saw something in your eyes I recognized, the look of someone who'd finally decided to stop running and start fighting." He met her gaze. "And because the moment your lips touched mine, something in me claimed you, not the syndicate leader. Me." The air between them felt electric, dangerous, honest. "We're both outsiders pretending to belong," Rain said softly. "Then let's be outsiders together," Namjoon replied, and when he smiled, it finally reached his eyes. The gala was being held at the Lotte Hotel's ballroom, and Rain had never felt more exposed in her life. The dress Namjoon had selected, midnight blue silk that clung to her curves like water, probably cost more than her entire year's living expenses. Diamonds borrowed from what he casually called the family collection glittered at her throat and ears. She looked like she belonged in this world of South Korea's elite and its shadowy underbelly. She felt like a fraud wearing a crown. "Breathe," Namjoon murmured against her ear as they entered, his hand possessive at the small of her back. He looked devastating in a black suit tailored so perfectly it seemed like a weapon. "You're not prey here. You're mine. That makes you untouchable." The ballroom fell silent as they descended the stairs. Rain felt every eye in the room assess her, calculate her worth, question why Kim Namjoon had brought a Black American woman to an event where bloodlines and business empires intertwined like DNA. She lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of the artist who'd once believed she could be extraordinary. Kim Namjoon, a silver-haired man approached, his smile sharp as broken glass. "We were surprised to hear about your companion. So unusual for you to bring someone to these gatherings." Rain Lakewood, Namjoon introduced her with a tone that brokered no disrespect. "An artist of considerable talent. Rain, this is Chairman Park. He collects art almost as obsessively as he collects gambling debts." Rain caught the threat beneath the politeness. Saw Park's smile tighten. This was a test. Every conversation tonight would be. "What kind of art do you create, Miss Lakewood?" Park asked, his English heavily accented but precise. "The kind that makes people uncomfortable," Rain replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I paint what others pretend not to see. Trauma, power, the violence we call love, and the love we call weakness." Something flickered in Park's eyes. Surprise? Perhaps respect. "Fascinating. You must show me your work sometime." As he moved away, Namjoon's hand tightened on her waist. "Well done," he whispered, and Rain felt the approval like a physical touch. The evening unfolded in a careful dance of introductions and subtle power plays. Rain quickly learned to read the room the way Namjoon did, identifying allies by their genuine smiles, enemies by their forced politeness, and the truly dangerous ones by their indifference. She watched him work, saw how he commanded respect without raising his voice, how a single look from him could end conversations or seal deals worth millions. But it was when they danced that everything shifted. Namjoon pulled her close on the ballroom floor, one hand spanning her waist, the other capturing hers with surprising gentleness. They moved together like they'd been doing this for years rather than weeks, his body leading hers through the waltz with effortless control. "You're not pretending anymore," he observed, his dark eyes searching hers. Rain realized he was right. Somewhere between the champagne and the calculated conversations, she'd stopped performing and started inhabiting this role. "Neither are you," she countered. "You're holding me like I'm real, not borrowed." "That's because you are real," Namjoon said, pulling her impossibly closer. "And everyone in this room now knows that you're not just a girl I saved. You're the woman standing beside their king." Rain was in the art studio when Namjoon's head of security found her, his expression grim enough to make her heart stutter. "Miss Lakewood, he's asking for you." Marcus was back in Seoul. She found Namjoon in his office, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city like a king surveying a kingdom that had disappointed him. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and she could see the tension coiled in every line of his body. On his desk sat a laptop playing security footage, Marcus entering the lobby of a building Rain recognized as one of Namjoon's legitimate import businesses. "He came to negotiate," Namjoon said without turning, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that preceded storms. "Walked into my office building this morning with a briefcase full of money and a proposal." Rain's blood turned to ice. What kind of proposal? He wants to buy you back. Namjoon finally turned and the fury in his eyes was banked but absolute. 5 million won. As if you were property. As if my protection was a business transaction he could outbid. The casual cruelty of it stole Rain's breath. Even after everything, Marcus still saw her as something to be owned, traded, reclaimed like a lost possession. He doesn't understand what you are to me, Namjoon continued, crossing to her with predatory grace. He thinks this is about money or territory or pride. He thinks I'm playing the same game he is. What game are you playing? Rain whispered. Namjoon cupped her face with both hands, his touch achingly gentle despite the violence simmering beneath his skin. No game. Not anymore. His thumb traced her lower lip, the gesture intimate and claiming. I told myself I was protecting an asset, maintaining an arrangement, but Marcus walking into my building trying to purchase you made me realize something. Rain's heart hammered against her ribs. What? That if anyone tried to take you from me, I would burn soul to the ground. His voice dropped to something raw and honest. You're not borrowed, Rain. You're not temporary. You stopped being an arrangement the moment you kissed me, and I've been lying to both of us pretending otherwise. Before Rain could process his words, his phone buzzed. Namjoon glanced at it, and his expression shifted into something cold and final. He's waiting in the lobby. He thinks I'm going to meet him, accept his money, and hand you over like a business deal. He released her face, straightening his cuffs with controlled violence. I'm going to teach him what happens when someone mistakes my woman for merchandise. Namjoon! Rain started, fear and something dangerously close to hope warring in her chest. He silenced her with a kiss that tasted like possession and promise. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers captive. Stay here. What happens next isn't something you need to witness. Will you kill him? Rain asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Namjoon smiled, and it was the smile of a dragon who'd been offered an insult that demanded blood. No, I'm going to make him understand that you were never his to buy. You're mine by choice, not transaction. And then I'm going to make sure he never forgets the difference. He left her standing in his office, her lips still burning from his kiss, understanding finally that she'd never been in a cage at all. She'd found her kingdom. Rain stood on the terrace overlooking Seoul's glittering sprawl, watching the sun set fire to the sky in shades of amber and rose gold. 3 hours had passed since Namjoon left to confront Marcus. 3 hours of pacing and painting and trying not to imagine what final settlement meant in the language of dragons and kings. She heard him before she saw him. The quiet footfall. The shift in air that always announced his presence. When she turned, Namjoon stood in the doorway still wearing his suit but somehow looking less guarded, as if he'd shed more than just his tie. It's done, he said simply. Rain searched his face for blood, for guilt, for anything that would tell her what done meant. Did you? He's alive, Namjoon interrupted, crossing to stand beside her at the railing. On a plane to Los Angeles with a broken jaw, shattered ribs, and a very clear understanding that you are not property to be bought or reclaimed. He signed documents relinquishing any claim to you, legal or otherwise. If he ever sets foot in South Korea again, or attempts contact, the settlement becomes permanent. Rain should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of the past year finally lift from her shoulders like shedding skin. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me for protecting what's mine. Namjoon turned to face her fully, and in the dying light he looked younger, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Rain, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Her heart stuttered. Okay. This started as an arrangement. Protection in exchange for the fiction of belonging to me. His hand found hers on the railing, fingers threading through with devastating gentleness. But somewhere between your desperate kiss and watching you command a room full of Seoul's most dangerous people, it stopped being fiction. At least for me. Rain's breath caught as Namjoon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not a ring, something else. He opened it to reveal a key, ornate and clearly custom-made, attached to a simple platinum band. This opens every door in this estate, he said quietly. Every safe, every room, every secret I've spent my life protecting. I'm not asking you to stay because you're afraid or because you need protection. Marcus is gone. You're free to leave, to return to your art, to build the life you came to Seoul to find. He pressed the key into her palm, closing her fingers around it with both hands. But if you stay, Rain Lakewood, stay as my partner, my equal. Not a girl I saved, but the woman I choose, and who chooses me. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that felt like falling. Stay as my wife, not my captive. Help me build an empire where you paint in the morning and stand beside me at night. Where your strength balances my brutality and my protection gives you wings instead of chains. Rain looked at the key gleaming in her palm, then at this beautiful, dangerous man who'd given her not just safety, but sovereignty. Who'd seen her at her most desperate and somehow found her worth keeping. I'm not running anymore, she said, and watched his careful control finally shatter into something like joy. I'm staying, Namjoon, not because I'm afraid of what's out there, but because I'm finally brave enough to claim what I want. And what do you want? He asked, voice rough. Rain reached up and pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like sunset and new beginnings. You, this, us. When they finally pulled apart, Seoul's lights had begun their nightly dance below, and Rain realized she was finally home. Thank you for staying until the end. That means more than you think. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe, like, and tell me what you felt in the comments. I read every single one because this isn't just storytelling, it's connection. And if you're ready for the next journey, don't wander too far. The next story is already waiting in the dark.